What if I told you that Prince Harry, the man who seemed to have found his happily ever after in a California mansion with Meghan Markle, once confessed that his heart had always belonged to someone else? Imagine the shockwaves. Imagine the betrayal. Imagine the sheer irony of a prince who fought the monarchy for love, only to admit that the woman standing by his side was never truly the one. Harry is 41 now, a man no longer young, no longer reckless, no longer shielded by the excuses of youth. And as the years stack up, so too does the weight of the truth he once kept hidden. The truth that Chelsea Davy, not Meghan Markle, was the love of his life. A woman who walked away, not because she didn't love him, but because she refused to sacrifice herself to the suffocating chains of royal life. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why does this matter now? Why should we, years later, care about the confessions of a man who is already married, already had children, already thrown away his crown? Because hidden beneath the fairy tale image of Meghan and Harry against the world lies a darker, more complicated reality, that Meghan was never his first choice. That the crown prince of scandal didn't actually follow his heart, but rather clung to what was left after his heart's true desire had walked away. And isn't that the cruelest twist of fate? You see, this isn't just a love story. It's a story of regret, timing, and choices that haunt a lifetime. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to marry one person while knowing deep down that another was the true love you let slip through your fingers? Harry knows. He admitted it. And in that admission, a fragile facade crumbled. Let's step back. Let's peel the layers. Picture Harry, a young man broken by the death of his mother. Diana's shadow loomed over everything. His grief, his rebellion, even his romantic choices. The women in his life weren't just girlfriends. They were attempts to fill a void left by the only woman who ever truly understood him. The irony? The one who came closest, Chelsea, was also the one who chose freedom over a gilded cage. Meghan, in contrast, wanted the cage. Or perhaps, she wanted to wear the cage like a crown, using it as a platform to elevate herself from Hollywood actress to duchess, and then from duchess to global celebrity. And Harry? He mistook ambition for destiny. He mistook Meghan's determination for devotion. Or maybe he simply chose her because she stayed when Chelsea left. But what does that really say about love? Was Meghan a soulmate, or simply the consolation prize? Now think about this. Chelsea was there through Harry's wildest years. She endured the scandals, the drunken antics, the tabloid frenzy. And yet, she loved him in a way that didn't demand transformation. She accepted him. Isn't that what love is supposed to be? Meghan, on the other hand, entered the scene when Harry was older, more vulnerable, and desperate for stability. She didn't embrace who he was. She reshaped him into what she needed. She branded him, packaged him, turned him into a weapon against the very family he once swore to protect. Do you see the difference? And the public saw it too. At Harry and Meghan's wedding, all eyes weren't on the bride walking down the aisle. Many eyes were on the pews, specifically on the face of Chelsea Davy, sitting quietly, bravely, watching the man she once called her love pledge his life to someone else. What was going through her mind? What was going through his? And why did the cameras linger just a little longer on her than they did on some of the other guests? Because everyone sensed it. That tension, that ghost of a love story that could have been. Fast forward to now. Harry, stripped of his royal duties, alienated from his family, and increasingly isolated even in California, has let slip what so many suspected. That Meghan was not the woman Diana would have wanted for him. That Meghan was not his first choice. That Meghan was not, in truth, the love of his life. He said it. He admitted it. At 41, with his life's choices closing in around him, he spoke the words Meghan has always feared, that his heart never truly belonged to her. But let me ask you, doesn't that make Meghan's entire narrative collapse? Think about it. Every Oprah interview, every Netflix documentary, every memoir page dripping with accusations, it all painted Meghan as the one who saved Harry from the prison of his birth. But what if the truth is, she didn't save him at all? What if she was simply the one who was still standing when the woman he really wanted had already walked away? That's not salvation. That's substitution. Now pause and imagine Meghan hearing those words. Chelsea was the love of my life. The anger, the humiliation, the The quiet fear that no matter what she does, no matter how many cameras she commands, she will always be the second choice. And the world knows it. That's the wound that never heals. But here's where it gets even darker. This isn't just about Harry and Meghan. This is about legacy. This is about the Windsor dynasty. Because Harry's confession isn't simply personal, it's political. It's cultural. It reveals the cracks in a marriage that was sold to the world as a fairy tale escape from tradition. And if Meghan was never his first choice, what does that say about the choices he made after? The interviews, the betrayals, the lawsuits. Were they acts of love or acts of desperation from a man trying to convince himself that his second choice was good enough? Every great story has a ghost. For Harry, that ghost is Chelsea Davy. She haunts the narrative, unspoken but undeniable. Meghan can never erase her. The palace can never erase her. And Harry himself, in confessing the truth, has made sure that Chelsea will forever remain the love story that outshines the one he tried to create. And here's where you, the audience, must face the question, have you ever chosen someone not because they were your destiny, but because they were simply the one who didn't leave? That's Harry's reality. That's Meghan's nightmare. And that's the tragedy of a prince who fought so hard for love, only to end up admitting that the woman by his side was never the woman in his heart. Because when Harry finally admitted who truly held his heart, it wasn't Meghan. And that's where this story takes its shocking turn. Before Meghan, before Chelsea, before the chaos of California and the explosive Netflix deals, there was a boy standing behind his mother's coffin, clutching his brother's hand, his face pale and blank for the cameras. A boy who was only 12 years old when the world stopped calling him Harry and began labeling him the Spare. That boy was Prince Harry. And if we are to understand why Chelsea Davy became the great love of his life, and why Meghan Markle would later become the substitute, we must start here, in the shadow of Diana. Because Diana's death didn't just leave a gap in Harry's life. It created an abyss. Imagine being 12, watching the only parent who truly understood you vanish overnight. One day she's hugging you, telling you bedtime stories, teasing you about your mischievous grin. The next, she's gone. Killed in a Paris tunnel, chased by flashing bulbs and the very paparazzi that would stalk your every move for the rest of your life. Do you see it? That wound. It never closed. Harry grew up with that scar bleeding beneath the surface, shaping every decision he made, every woman he loved, every fight he picked with the family he once served. He wasn't just searching for love. He was searching for Diana, someone who would make him feel seen, someone who would give him the warmth and the freedom he lost the night she died. But here's the twist. The palace didn't want him to grieve like a son. They wanted him to endure like a soldier. They forced him to march behind the coffin. They forced him to keep a stiff upper lip. They forced him to embody a role he never asked for. And Harry, rebellious to his core, began to unravel. The drinking, the drugs, the scandals splashed across front pages. From strip clubs in Vegas to Nazi costumes at Halloween, Harry became the wild child prince, the one who embarrassed the monarchy, the one who carried Diana's fiery rebellion, but without her grace. And the press loved it. They branded him the party prince. They mocked him. They hunted him. But have you ever asked yourself why? Why did he spiral so badly? Why did he throw himself into chaos? Because deep down, Harry was suffocating. Every headline about him wasn't just gossip. It was salt on a wound that never healed. And he was screaming, silently, for someone to see the pain beneath the smile. And then came Chelsea Davy. But before we get to her, let's pause. Let's picture Harry in those years. A young man trapped between duty and grief. A young man desperate to find something real in a world that only saw him as a headline. He wanted escape. He wanted someone who didn't care about the crown. Someone who saw Harry, not Prince Harry. That's why Chelsea would matter so much later. She was the opposite of the palace. She was freedom, laughter, authenticity. But here's the cliffhanger. Long before Chelsea, Harry's search for love wasn't really about romance. It was about Diana. It was about filling a void no woman could ever truly replace. And when he finally found someone who came close, the cost would be too high. Because if Diana's death set Harry on a path of rebellion, Chelsea's arrival would set him on a path of heartbreak. And the story of how those two forces collided, that's where everything changes. But then, one woman walked into his life, and everything changed. She wasn't royal. She wasn't polished. She wasn't the kind of woman the palace expected Harry to bring home. But maybe that's exactly why he fell for her. Chelsea Davy. A girl from Zimbabwe, wild-haired, sun-kissed, and unapologetically free. The moment she crossed paths with Prince Harry, she represented everything he'd been craving since the suffocating weight of Diana's death and the cold walls of the monarchy pressed down on him. Think about it. Harry had spent his entire adolescence trapped inside an institution that told him how to walk, how to smile, even how to grieve. Every girlfriend he'd been linked to before Chelsea seemed like a test run, a palace-approved flirtation. But Chelsea? She was different. She didn't bend to royal etiquette. She didn't fawn over his title. She didn't dream of tiaras and palaces. She was her own person, fiery, untamed, and very much uninterested in being anyone's duchess. And that, ironically, made her irresistible to Harry. They first met in Cape Town, South Africa. The backdrop? Sunlight, music, a world away from Buckingham Palace's stiff corridors. Can you picture it? Harry, the restless prince, seeking escape in Africa, a land his mother adored, a land where the cameras couldn't suffocate him quite as much. And there she was, Chelsea. She was studying law, grounded in reality, yet carried the spirit of someone who lived for the moment. She wasn't dazzled by his title. She teased him. She challenged him. She made him laugh in a way the palace never could. For a boy who had grown up being treated like a symbol, she treated him like a man. And that's all he ever wanted. Have you ever met someone who just gets you? Instantly. That was Chelsea for Harry. She represented freedom. She wasn't afraid to argue, to walk away, to tell him when he was being ridiculous. She was his equal, not his subject. And for the first time, Harry wasn't just Prince Harry. He was just Harry. Now, let's be honest. The relationship was messy, passionate, chaotic, emotional. But isn't that what makes a love story unforgettable? They would fight, they would break up, they would reunite. But every time, the pull was too strong to resist. She grounded him, and he gave her a glimpse of a world most people only see in movies. But here's the irony. The very things that made Chelsea perfect for Harry made her a nightmare for the monarchy. She wasn't willing to play the part. She wasn't going to be molded into the obedient princess. And the palace knew it. The press knew it. Meghan, years later, would know it too. Because Chelsea wasn't the type to be controlled. She valued her freedom above all else. She loved Harry, but she hated the circus that came with him. Imagine trying to walk down the street, only to find cameras in your face. Imagine dating someone and realizing the entire world feels entitled to your private life. Chelsea didn't want it. She couldn't stand it. And yet, she loved him enough to try. Harry, on the other hand, was desperate. He clung to her. She was his escape, his lifeline. He brought her into his world, to royal events, even introducing her to his family. Can you picture that scene? Chelsea, the wild girl from Zimbabwe, sitting awkwardly in a palace filled with tradition and formality. The contrast was almost comical. And yet, she fit, because Harry wanted her to. But there's a cruel truth here. While Harry saw Chelsea as salvation, Chelsea saw the warning signs. She understood something Harry didn't want to admit, that no matter how much they loved each other, the palace would never let her breathe. And here's the part that stings. Harry once told friends that Chelsea was the one. Yes, those words. The one. Can you imagine hearing that years later, knowing he married Meghan instead? That's the tragedy. That's the heartbreak. That's the confession Meghan could never erase. But Chelsea wasn't blinded by love. She knew the cost of staying. And the more the cameras followed her, the more the palace tried to groom her, the more she realized she couldn't do it. She didn't want tiaras. She didn't want palaces. She didn't want to lose herself just to be Harry's princess. Still, during those early years, before the storm clouds gathered, there was magic. Parties in London, trips to Africa, whispered secrets under starlit skies. They were young, reckless, and deeply in love. And for a time, it looked like Harry had found his forever. But here's where the irony cuts deep. Meghan Markle would later seize what Chelsea rejected. Meghan wanted the spotlight. Meghan thrived in it. Chelsea ran from it. And that contrast would shape the rest of Harry's life. But before Meghan, before California, before Oprah interviews and royal exits, there was a boy and a girl who fell in love under African skies. A love that was real. A love that was raw. A love that almost was. And yet, the very freedom that drew him to her, was the thing that would eventually tear them apart. She didn't care about tiaras. She didn't care about carriages or castles or the dazzling pomp that came with being close to a prince. Chelsea Davy cared about Harry, the man, not the title. And that alone made their love story both beautiful and doomed. Because make no mistake, what Harry and Chelsea shared wasn't some polished fairy tale. It wasn't the staged smiles we'd later see plastered across Netflix specials. It was raw. It was chaotic. It was real. Theirs was the kind of love that burns bright, fast, and dangerously close to self-destruction. Think about it. Have you ever loved someone so much that logic went out the window? That's what Harry felt with Chelsea. And the irony? For once in his life, logic wasn't what he needed. He needed someone who made him feel alive. Chelsea did that. Let's paint the picture. Harry, despair, branded by the tabloids as reckless, irresponsible, even embarrassing to the monarchy. He was the boy who smoked weed, who wore offensive costumes, who stumbled out of nightclubs at dawn. And the media loved to tear him apart for it. But Chelsea didn't see Prince Harry, the scandal. She saw the boy underneath, the one still grieving his mother, the one who wanted to laugh without consequence, the one who wanted to be ordinary in a world that would never let him be. And Chelsea? She was unlike any woman the royals had ever expected Harry to bring home. She didn't fit into their mold, and she didn't want to. She was outspoken, stubborn, fiercely independent. She didn't shrink in Harry's presence. She challenged him. She matched him shot for shot at parties. She called him out when he acted like a spoiled prince. And Harry loved it. For once, someone treated him like a man, not a porcelain figurine. But here's where the story takes its messy turn. Their relationship was a storm. Passion and fire, yes, but also jealousy, arguments, and constant breakups. One night, they'd be inseparable, laughing in London clubs. The next, Chelsea would storm out, tired of the drama, tired of the cameras, tired of being suffocated by a life she never wanted. And Harry? He couldn't let go. He always came back. Again and again, they tried to make it work. It was the classic on-again, off-again love affair. Except this wasn't two ordinary people. This was a prince and the woman who would never quite belong in his world. Ask yourself this. Isn't that the most human love story of all? Not the polished, perfect romances sold in glossy magazines, but the messy, flawed, desperate kind that leaves scars. That was Chelsea and Harry. They weren't pretending. They weren't performing. They were two young people clinging to each other against a tidal wave of pressure. And there were moments, private, intimate moments, when Harry believed he'd found his soulmate. He once told friends Chelsea was the one. Imagine that. The man who later stood at the altar with Meghan Markle had already said those words about another woman. Doesn't that tell you everything? But here's the painful twist. Chelsea didn't want what Harry was offering. She didn't want palaces. She didn't want the burden of royal life. She didn't want to wake up every morning with her face on the front page. She loved Harry, but she loved her freedom more. And can you blame her? Imagine your boyfriend's family isn't just any family. It's the monarchy. Imagine your relationship being dissected by millions of strangers. Imagine not being able to walk down the street without cameras chasing you. Meghan later thrived in that environment. Chelsea despised it. Yet through all the chaos, one thing was clear. Chelsea truly cared for Harry. She wasn't after his title. She wasn't chasing a crown. If anything, she ran from it. Her love was the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. The purest kind. And that's why Harry never forgot her. That's why, even at 41, he confessed she was the love of his life. But here's the cruel irony. The very traits that made Chelsea perfect for Harry made her impossible as a royal bride. She was too real, too unpolished, too unwilling to bend. She didn't want to be reshaped into the perfect duchess. And so their love was destined to collapse under the weight of the crown. Still, for those fleeting years, Harry had something authentic. Not a brand, not a PR campaign, not a carefully managed narrative. Just love. Messy, unpredictable, intoxicating love. And that's why it hurt so much when it ended. Because every time Harry looked at Chelsea, he saw what could have been, a life of laughter, freedom, and truth. But every time Chelsea looked at Harry, she saw what would never be, peace, privacy, and independence. So here's the question. Can love really survive when two people want such different futures? Harry wanted her. Chelsea wanted freedom. And eventually, something had to give. But what happens when the one person who makes you feel alive is also the one person who refuses to stay? That's the heartbreak that defined Harry's 20s. That's the ghost that followed him into his 30s. And that's the reason Meghan Markle would later slip into the role of wife, not as Harry's first choice, but as the woman who simply didn't walk away. Because no love with a prince comes without chains, and Chelsea began to feel them tightening. Dating a prince wasn't a romance, it was a battlefield. For Chelsea Davy, the love she shared with Harry came wrapped in barbed wire, every kiss shadowed by flashing bulbs, every smile dissected in headlines she never asked for. And for Harry, the boy who once longed to be ordinary, falling in love meant dragging the woman he adored into the very spotlight he had spent his whole life resenting. This is where their love story turned from passion into pressure. Because it wasn't just about two young people anymore. It was about the monarchy. It was about the press. It was about a world that would never allow Harry and Chelsea to simply be. Let's picture it. A Friday night in London. Harry and Chelsea, hand in hand, slipping into a nightclub to dance, to drink, to feel normal. For a few hours, they laughed, they kissed, they forgot who they were. But by morning, the newspapers had already published the photos. Harry's wild night out with Chelsea. The tabloids didn't just report, they judged, they mocked, they spun the narrative. Suddenly, Chelsea wasn't a law student. She wasn't a young woman in love. She was a wild party girl, unfit for royal life. Do you see the cruelty here? The press built her up only to tear her down. They painted her as reckless, unstable, even lazy. But why? Because she dared to date the spare. Because she didn't look or act like the palace-approved archetype of a future princess. And behind the tabloids stood the palace itself. Buckingham Palace wasn't blind to Harry's romance. They saw Chelsea, the girl from Zimbabwe, as a liability. Too outspoken, too unwilling to bend, too unpredictable. In their eyes, she didn't fit the mold. And if you've ever wondered how suffocating royal life can be, just remember, even Diana, a noble-born aristocrat, was chewed up and spit out by the same system. What chance did Chelsea have? The pressure mounted. Imagine Chelsea waking up, her phone buzzing with calls from friends telling her she was on the front page again. Imagine walking into class at university only to be met with whispers, stares, jokes. Imagine realizing your boyfriend's family didn't see you as a girlfriend. They saw you as a potential problem. That's what Chelsea endured. Harry, of course, tried to protect her. He raged against the press. He lashed out at photographers. He begged the palace to give her space. But Harry was still trapped in the same machine. He couldn't stop the tabloids. He couldn't silence the whispers in the palace corridors. He couldn't give Chelsea the peace she desperately craved. And here's the contradiction. The very thing that made Harry love Chelsea, her wild independence, was the very thing the palace despised. Chelsea didn't want to be trained. She didn't want etiquette lessons. She didn't want to be told how to smile, how to dress, how to speak. She didn't want to play the part. And in royal circles, refusing to play the part is unforgivable. Have you ever felt torn between love and freedom? That was Chelsea. She adored Harry. But every day she felt the noose tightening. The paparazzi outside her door. The headlines calling her unsuitable. The pressure from courtiers who made it clear she wasn't their idea of a princess. And the question began to haunt her. Was any love worth this? For Harry, the answer was simple, yes. He wanted Chelsea. He needed her. She was his escape from a world that suffocated him. But for Chelsea, the answer wasn't so clear. She didn't want to sacrifice her identity, her privacy, her sanity, for a crown she never asked for. And this is where the cracks in their love story became undeniable. Nights out turned into arguments. Phone calls ended in tears. Harry begged her to endure it, to hold on, to believe that their love could survive the glare of the spotlight. But Chelsea saw what Harry refused to. The spotlight would never dim. If anything, it would only grow brighter. And here lies the tragedy. Harry thought his title was the problem. Chelsea knew it was the reality. You don't just date a prince. You date the monarchy. You date the press. You date the whole machine. And she wasn't willing to do it. Yet for all the pressure, for all the suffocation, their bond remained strong until it broke. Because at some point, love alone is not enough. And so Chelsea made a choice. A choice that would not only end her relationship with Harry, but would shape the course of his entire future. Because when the press became unbearable and the palace whispered unfit, and Harry begged her to stay, Chelsea made the decision that would change his life forever. Harry begged her to stay. He pleaded. He promised things would change, that he would shield her, that their love was strong enough to withstand the storm. But Chelsea Davy knew something Harry could not accept. No matter how much he loved her, no matter how much he tried, their relationship was doomed by the world around them. And so she did the unthinkable. She walked away. This was not just any breakup. This was heartbreak on a royal scale. For Harry, it felt like losing his mother all over again. Another woman he adored slipping out of his life. Another gaping hole where love should have been. For Chelsea, it was a decision she made with tears in her eyes. Her heart split in two. She loved him, but she loved her freedom more. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever had to choose between the person you love and the life you know you deserve? That's the knife Chelsea had to twist into her own chest. Because in Harry, she saw passion, laughter, and devotion. But in his world, she saw suffocation, loss of privacy, and a future shackled to cameras and courtiers who would never truly accept her. The signs had been there for years. Each argument, each breakup, each reconciliation was a warning that love might not be enough. But Harry ignored the warnings. He believed that if Diana had suffered for love, he too could endure the weight of the crown for his. He was wrong. When Chelsea finally ended it for good, Harry was devastated. Friends say he was inconsolable, that he drank harder, partied more recklessly, and lashed out at the press with even greater fury. He didn't just lose a girlfriend. He lost the anchor that kept him grounded. Chelsea had been the one person who saw him, truly saw him, not as a prince, not as a symbol, but as a man. Without her, he was adrift. And here's the painful irony. Chelsea didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she did love him. She understood that if she stayed, their relationship would destroy them both. She knew she would grow to resent the life, resent the press, resent him. And she refused to let her love curdle into hate. That kind of wisdom takes courage. That kind of courage breaks hearts. Harry never truly got over her. Years later, when Meghan Markle came along, those closest to Harry noticed something striking. Meghan wasn't his first choice. She was the woman who appeared when his first choice was already gone. Meghan offered him something Chelsea never could, not freedom, but a shared appetite for the spotlight. And Harry, wounded from losing Chelsea, convinced himself that this was enough. But deep down, the shadow of Chelsea lingered. She was the woman he once imagined at his side forever. She was the one he wanted to introduce as his wife. She was the one he once told friends was the love of his life. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It becomes a ghost, haunting every kiss, every smile, every promise made to another. And if you think Meghan didn't know that, think again. Meghan understood the power of a ghost. She knew Chelsea was more than an ex. She was the standard Harry measured all others against. And that insecurity would become a fracture in Meghan's carefully constructed fairy tale. But let's return to that moment. The breakup, Harry's devastation. The newspapers framed it as just another party prince scandal. But this wasn't about scandal. This was about heartbreak. Pure, raw heartbreak. A man who grew up with cameras in his face was finally forced to admit that love, even when it was real, couldn't save him from the world he was born into. And here's the cruel truth. Harry would carry that heartbreak for the rest of his life. Every decision, every rebellion, every dramatic move against his family would be shaped, in part, by the woman who chose freedom over him. Losing Chelsea didn't just break his heart, it changed his destiny. So when the door closed on Chelsea Davy, another door opened. And through that door walked a woman with Hollywood ambition, a hunger for fame, and the determination to succeed where Chelsea refused. Because while Chelsea left Harry to protect her freedom, Meghan entered his life ready to embrace the very change Chelsea had rejected. And that's when the door opened for Meghan. She wasn't his first love. She wasn't even the woman Harry had once sworn was the one. But Meghan Markle saw something Chelsea Davy never wanted to see, an opportunity. When Meghan stepped into Harry's orbit, he was raw, wounded, and searching. The loss of Chelsea had left him vulnerable. His heart was still bleeding, his ego bruised, his soul craving comfort. And Meghan arrived not as a bandage, but as a builder, ready to reconstruct Harry into the man she wanted him to be, even if it meant erasing the man he already was. Let's set the stage. Harry was in his 30s, older now, less the party prince, and more the lonely bachelor. His brother was married, his friends were settling down, and the press mocked him as the spare who couldn't find a wife. Inside, though, he was still haunted. Haunted by Chelsea's laughter, haunted by what could have been, haunted by the idea that the woman he truly loved had chosen freedom over him. Enter Meghan Markle, a divorced actress from Hollywood, used to chasing auditions, navigating rejection, and finding ways to climb the ladder. She wasn't from Harry's world. She didn't have aristocratic ties. She didn't move in royal circles. But maybe that was her strength. She saw Harry not as untouchable royalty, but as a man with scars she could exploit or heal, depending on how you see it. From the very beginning, Meghan played it differently. Where Chelsea resisted the spotlight, Meghan leaned into it. She didn't run from cameras, she smiled at them. She didn't resent the press, she knew how to use it. And Harry, weary of being chased, mistook Meghan's appetite for attention as resilience. To him, it looked like strength. To her, it was strategy. Ask yourself this. Isn't it easier to captivate a man when he's at his weakest? That was Harry when he met Meghan. Freshly scarred from Chelsea's final departure, desperate for affection, desperate for validation. Meghan gave him that. She told him what he needed to hear. She painted herself as his savior. She wasn't running from royal life. She was running toward it. And for Harry, that difference was intoxicating. But here's the irony. Meghan wasn't filling the void Chelsea left, she was covering it. With Meghan, Harry wasn't reminded of what he lost. He was distracted. She gave him a new narrative. Not the heartbroken prince abandoned by his true love, but the rebel prince rescued by a bold American actress. And Harry clung to that story like a lifeline. Still, Meghan knew. She knew Chelsea wasn't just another ex. She knew Chelsea was the one who got away. And behind the smiles, Meghan carried an insecurity that would later drive wedges into her marriage. Because how do you compete with the ghost of a love story so real, so raw, so undeniable? Meghan's answer was simple. You erase it. You rewrite the script. You become the one. And so Meghan began her campaign. She molded Harry, shifted him, encouraged him to step further from his family and closer into her world. Where Chelsea had told Harry to be himself, Meghan told Harry to reinvent himself. And he did. For her. Because when you've lost the woman you once called the love of your life, you'll do almost anything to convince yourself the next woman is meant to be. But let's not forget, Harry wasn't blind. He knew, deep down, that Meghan wasn't Chelsea. He knew the connection wasn't the same. Meghan may have been a partner, but she wasn't his anchor. She wasn't his equal. She wasn't the girl who laughed at his mistakes and loved him anyway. Meghan wanted a project. Chelsea had wanted a person. And yet, Harry chose Meghan. Why? Because Meghan stayed. Where Chelsea walked away, Meghan leaned in. Where Chelsea refused the circus, Meghan embraced it. Where Chelsea wanted out, Meghan wanted more. So when Meghan said yes to Harry's proposal, the world cheered. But beneath the celebration lay a truth Harry could never escape. Meghan was not the woman he had once dreamed of marrying. She was not the love he had confessed to friends. She was not his first choice. She was his second chance. And that difference would shape everything. Harry thought he had found a second chance. But was it love or a rebound? When Meghan said yes, the world erupted in applause. The press framed it as a fairy tale. The palace staged it as a triumph. Harry had finally settled down. The party prince had found his bride. But beneath the cheers and headlines, beneath the rehearsed smiles and the pomp of a royal wedding, there was a truth Harry couldn't silence. He was marrying his second choice. Think about the ceremony itself. St. George's Chapel, trumpets blaring, the Queen watching with measured dignity. Meghan in a dazzling gown, walking down the aisle like she had been preparing for this moment her whole life. But look closer. Look at Harry's face. There were smiles, yes, but there was also something else. A shadow, a hesitation, almost as if part of him was wondering what life would have been like if the woman in white wasn't Meghan, but Chelsea. Do you remember? Chelsea was there, sitting in the pews, quiet, graceful, watching the man she once loved pledge himself to another. The cameras caught her expression, somber, reflective, maybe even wounded. For Meghan, this was her coronation into global stardom. For Harry, it was a wedding shadowed by ghosts. And that's the cruelty of it. Harry had once told friends Chelsea was the one. Now here he was, marrying Meghan, convincing himself that destiny sometimes comes in second chances. But is that really true? Can a second choice ever feel like fate? Or is it always haunted by the first? The marriage began with spectacle, but even in the beginning, cracks showed. Meghan's ambition didn't fade after the vows. It grew louder. She wanted influence, platforms, projects. And Harry, desperate to please, followed her lead. Contrast that with Chelsea, who had begged for privacy, who wanted less spotlight, not more. Meghan's hunger for fame was the very opposite of what had torn him and Chelsea apart. But Harry was blind to the contradiction. He told himself this was love, that Meghan was his salvation. Yet late at night, in moments of quiet, did he ever think of Chelsea? Did he ever remember the girl who loved him without needing cameras, without demanding a stage? That question lingers like smoke at the edges of their marriage. And Meghan? Meghan wasn't naive. She knew she wasn't the first. She knew the ghost of Chelsea lingered. That's why she worked so hard to erase her from the narrative. Meghan's story was always about her and Harry against the world. There was no room for a woman who came before. But history doesn't vanish just because you want it to. Ask yourself this. Can a marriage thrive when one partner secretly wonders if he's settling? When deep down, the vows are spoken with conviction, but the heart still whispers another name. Harry's face on his wedding day told a story the headlines never did. He wasn't just gaining a wife. He was losing the final hope of ever rekindling the love he once believed would last forever. And so, Meghan became the Duchess. The headlines celebrated her as Harry's great love. But behind palace doors, behind closed curtains, there was a silence, a truth Meghan could never shake. Because in every relationship, there's an unspoken truth. If you weren't the first choice, you'll always feel it. And for Harry, every smile with Meghan carried that unspoken truth. The public saw a fairy tale, but Harry's heart knew otherwise. When Meghan walked down the aisle, the world cheered. But Harry's heart whispered a different name. But Meghan knew she wasn't the first. The chapel was silent, sacred, filled with history. Trumpets had just announced the arrival of Meghan Markle, and millions around the world watched as she walked slowly down the aisle. But while the cameras lingered on the bride, many eyes turned elsewhere, to the pews, where Chelsea Davies sat. Imagine it. The woman who had once been called the one, now watching the man she loved pledge his life to another. The tension was thick, almost unbearable. Meghan's smile dazzled, but Chelsea's face told a different story. Somber, composed, a mask hiding emotions no camera could fully capture. Have you ever been to a wedding where you weren't just a guest, you were the ghost? That's what Chelsea was. She wasn't just another ex-girlfriend in attendance. She was the ex, the woman Harry once swore was the love of his life. And her presence spoke louder than the vows echoing through St. George's Chapel. The tabloids caught it instantly. Chelsea Davy looked sad at royal wedding. Headlines flew across the internet, dissecting her every glance, every expression. Was she heartbroken? Was she relieved? Was she regretting her decision to walk away? Or reaffirming it? The world wanted to know. But the truth is far more complicated. Chelsea had loved Harry deeply. She had been with him through his wildest years, had endured the chaos of paparazzi, had seen him raw and unpolished in ways Meghan never had. And now she was watching him marry someone else, someone who embraced the very world Chelsea had rejected. That contrast must have been agonizing. And Harry? Did he see her sitting there? Did his eyes flicker toward her as he exchanged vows? We may never know. But those close to him whispered that her presence unsettled him. How could it not? The love of your life, sitting in the shadows as you commit to another. It was a haunting reminder that this day, as grand as it was, wasn't the day he once dreamed of. For Meghan, though, Chelsea's attendance was both a triumph and a threat. On one hand, it proved Meghan had won. Harry had chosen her. Chelsea had walked away, and Meghan stood at the altar. But on the other hand, Meghan couldn't ignore what Chelsea symbolized. She was the ghost of Harry's past, the living reminder. The audience watching from home felt it too. The whispers, the speculation. Many said Meghan's victory felt incomplete because Chelsea's quiet presence stole part of the spotlight. People weren't just asking about Meghan's dress or Harry's vows. They were asking, what is Chelsea thinking? And here's the cruel irony. In trying to celebrate Harry's new beginning, the world couldn't help but revisit the ending of his great love story. Chelsea was supposed to be in the past. Yet there she was, in the pews, her silence louder than any speech. So let me ask you, what would you have done? Would you have attended the wedding of the man you once loved, knowing the world would dissect your every blink, your every sigh? Or would you have stayed away, sparing yourself the pain? Chelsea chose courage. She chose presence. And in doing so, she made herself unforgettable. For Meghan, this was supposed to be her crowning moment. But Chelsea's face, solemn and unshakable, became one of the most iconic images of that day. Because when the woman Harry once loved sat in the pews watching him marry another, the world realized something Meghan could never erase. Harry's story wasn't just hers to tell. And what Meghan thought was a victory was actually her greatest insecurity. Behind the palace walls, beneath the glimmering facade of titles, tiaras, and curated photo ops, Meghan Markle carried a private fear. A fear with a name. Chelsea Davy. Because Meghan knew. She always knew. She wasn't Harry's first love. She wasn't the girl who laughed with him in Africa, who kissed him under starlit skies, who stuck with him through the chaos of his wild 20s. That girl had been Chelsea. And though Chelsea chose freedom over Harry, her ghost lingered, always present, always threatening. Think about it. Every marriage has shadows. Every couple carries the memories of those who came before. But when your husband's ex is the one he once told friends was the love of my life, those shadows don't fade. They grow. They loom. They whisper. And Meghan, ever perceptive, felt them everywhere. At first, she masked it. She played the role of the dazzling duchess, the victorious bride. She told herself she had won. Harry had chosen her, not Chelsea. But deep down, she couldn't shake the insecurity. Because was it really a choice, or simply circumstance? Did Harry love Meghan for Meghan? Or did he marry her because Chelsea refused to stay? And Meghan, who had built her entire life on the power of image, couldn't ignore that question. To the public, she presented confidence. To Harry, she projected devotion. But inside, she wrestled with a gnawing truth. No matter what she did, she could never be the first. Do you see the irony? Chelsea didn't want the spotlight. She fled from it. She wanted freedom, not fame. Meghan, on the other hand, embraced it. She sought the cameras, cultivated the brand, wielded the platform. Yet despite all her efforts, Chelsea still held something Meghan could never claim. Harry's pure, untainted first love. And Meghan wasn't naive. She saw how Harry's face changed when Chelsea's name surfaced in conversation. She noticed his tone soften when speaking about the past. She recognized the way his friends still mentioned Chelsea with affection. To Meghan, it was intolerable. So what did she do? She began rewriting the narrative. Piece by piece, she reshaped Harry's story. Meghan wasn't just his wife, she was his savior. She was the woman who pulled him from the clutches of an oppressive monarchy, who freed him from the shadows of his family, who gave him a new life in California. With Meghan by his side, Harry wasn't the grieving boy Chelsea once comforted. He was the reborn man Meghan claimed to have molded. But here's the contradiction. Meghan's entire identity as Harry's partner was built on erasing Chelsea. Yet the harder she tried to bury the ghost, the more alive it became. The press wouldn't let Chelsea go. Royal watchers wouldn't let Chelsea go. And most painfully, Harry himself couldn't let Chelsea go. Have you ever tried to compete with a memory? It's impossible. Memories don't age. They don't falter. They remain perfect snapshots frozen in time. Meghan could control cameras, interviews, even Harry's public image, but she couldn't control his memories. And Chelsea lived there, quietly, endlessly. This is where Meghan's jealousy sharpened, where her insecurities became daggers. She began to sense that no matter how much Harry said he loved her, part of him still longed for the life he might have had with Chelsea, the life of privacy, authenticity, and unfiltered love. Meghan gave him ambition, platforms, projects. Chelsea had given him peace. And peace, once lost, becomes priceless. So Meghan fought harder. She encouraged distance from Harry's old friends, the the very ones who knew his bond with Chelsea. She pushed for new narratives, interviews, documentaries, books, all designed to cement her as Harry's one and only. But the irony was brutal. Every attempt to prove herself only highlighted the truth she feared most. She wasn't the first. And then came the slip. A moment Meghan couldn't control. A moment where Harry, tired, reflective, vulnerable, admitted the truth out loud. Words Meghan dreaded hearing. Words that confirmed every insecurity she carried. Because when Harry let it slip, when he confessed that Chelsea was the love of his life, Meghan's world cracked. But one slip from Harry would reveal the truth Meghan feared most. It didn't happen in a palace. It didn't happen on camera, with the world watching. It happened quietly, almost casually. Yet the ripple shook everything Meghan had worked so hard to build. Prince Harry, at 41, finally admitted the words Meghan had feared from the very beginning. Chelsea was the love of my life. Think about that. For years, Meghan had crafted the story of her marriage as a fairy tale, a love that defied tradition, a bond so strong it could topple a monarchy. But in just a few words, Harry shattered that narrative. He spoke not as a duke, not as a celebrity, but as a man haunted by his past. And in that moment, the mask slipped. The confession didn't come as a rehearsed line. It came like a sigh, a truth too heavy to suppress any longer. Friends close to him had always known. They'd heard him call Chelsea the one back in his 20s. They'd seen how devastated he was after their final breakup. But Meghan? Meghan wanted to believe she had erased all that. She wanted to believe she was the only name on Harry's lips. And now, the ghost of Chelsea had spoken again, through Harry himself. Can you imagine Meghan's reaction? The humiliation, the fury, the cold realization that even after years of marriage, after children, after their dramatic exit from royal life, she was still the woman who came second. For someone as image-conscious as Meghan, it wasn't just a personal blow. It was a public one. Because if Harry admitted Chelsea was the love of his life, what did that make Meghan? The substitute? The stand-in? The consolation prize? Let's pause here. Have you ever been in a relationship where your partner still carried a flame for someone else? Even if they didn't act on it, even if it was buried, you felt it, didn't you? That lingering shadow, that silent comparison. For Meghan, Harry's confession ripped that shadow into the light. She couldn't compete with a memory. She couldn't compete with the purity of a first love. And now, the entire world knew it. For Harry, though, the confession was almost a release. He had carried the weight of regret for so long. Regret for losing Chelsea. Regret for settling into a marriage that never felt the same. Saying the words out loud was like exhaling after years of holding his breath. Painful, yes, but liberating. Because the truth has a way of setting itself free, no matter how hard you try to bury it. And here's the twist. Harry's confession wasn't just about love. It was about identity. By admitting Chelsea was the love of his life, Harry was admitting that Meghan had never truly been the fairy tale he tried to sell. He was admitting that the choices he made, the interviews, the memoir, the exile to California, were not the story of a man who found his soulmate, but of a man trying to justify the absence of one. Meghan's response was predictable. Anger, denial, spin. If there's one thing Meghan knows, it's how to control a narrative. But no PR team in the world can erase the sting of those words. Harry's confession wasn't a headline Meghan could outmaneuver. It was a dagger. And once said, it could never be unsaid. The world, of course, seized on it. Headlines blared. Harry admits Chelsea was his true love. Social media exploded with debates. Some sympathized with Meghan. How could anyone endure being called the second choice? Others sympathized with Harry. How tragic to marry one woman while still yearning for another. And some, perhaps most cruelly, sympathized with Chelsea, the woman who walked away and yet still held Harry's heart decades later. But here's where it gets even darker. Harry's confession didn't just wound Meghan. It undermined their entire brand. The Harry and Meghan against the world story relied on the belief that their love was unique, unshakable, destined. If Chelsea had been the true love, then Meghan's story collapsed into something else: convenience. A love of timing, not destiny. And convenience never sells as well as fairy tales. For Harry, though, there was no going back. Once the truth is spoken, it lives forever. He had said it. Chelsea was the love of his life. Meghan could rage, the palace could spin, the world could gossip, but Harry's heart had finally revealed itself. Because sometimes the most powerful confessions aren't shouted from rooftops. They're whispered when no one expects them. And Harry's whisper carried the weight of a lifetime. Because once the truth is spoken, it cannot be unsaid. The moment Harry's words escaped his lips, the ripple became a tidal wave. Chelsea was the love of my life. It didn't stay private. It couldn't. In the age of instant headlines and viral tweets, nothing remains hidden for long. And soon, the confession Meghan had dreaded became public knowledge. The fallout was immediate. Tabloids plastered Chelsea's face across their covers once again, resurrecting her story as though she had never left the stage. Harry's true love revealed. Meghan was never his first choice. The ghost of Chelsea haunts the Sussexes. Social media, that merciless courtroom of public opinion, roared to life. Hashtags trended. Memes exploded. Debates flared. And suddenly, Meghan's carefully crafted image of being Harry's one and only began to fracture. Think about the humiliation. Meghan had spent years presenting herself as the woman who saved Harry, the partner who gave him the courage to step away from the monarchy, the wife who was his soulmate. And now, with just one slip of the tongue, Harry had undermined it all. If Chelsea was the love of his life, then what did that make Meghan? The second choice, the runner-up, the consolation prize. And in Meghan's world, perception is everything. Public sympathy didn't pour in for Meghan. Instead, much of it flowed toward Chelsea. The world romanticized her as the one who got away. People revisited old photos of Harry and Chelsea, analyzing their smiles, their body language, their chemistry. He looked happiest with her, some said. Chelsea truly loved him for who he was, others chimed. The narrative shifted. Chelsea, who had once been dismissed as unsuitable, suddenly looked like the perfect fit. And Meghan? She looked like the opportunist who simply arrived when the seat was empty. For Harry, the fallout was complicated. On one hand, he felt relief. He had finally said the truth out loud, a truth he had carried in silence for years. But on the other hand, he watched the storm it created. Meghan's rage, the media frenzy, the palace smirking from the sidelines. Knowing this was proof their warnings had always been right. It was chaos, something Harry had lived with his whole life, but chaos of a different kind this time. It was personal, and Meghan didn't take it lightly. Behind closed doors, there were arguments, icy silences, accusations. She demanded explanations. How could he humiliate her like that? How could he betray her with words so careless, so cruel? But here's the truth. Were they careless, or were they inevitable? Because deep down, Harry had always known. And deep down, Meghan had always feared. The public fallout didn't just bruise Meghan's ego. It wounded their brand. Netflix deals, interviews, books, all of it hinged on the idea of their love being extraordinary. But extraordinary love doesn't come with disclaimers. It doesn't come with footnotes saying, by the way, the real love of my life left years ago. Audiences who once bought into the fairy tale began to ask harder questions. Was Meghan just a substitute? Was Harry clinging to her because he couldn't have Chelsea? Was this marriage built on love or on convenience? Even worse for Meghan, comparisons intensified. Chelsea's face, unassuming and natural, was suddenly everywhere. Side-by-side photos filled tabloids. Meghan in designer gowns, Chelsea in simple sundresses. Meghan giving interviews, Chelsea living privately. Meghan accused of chasing fame, Chelsea praised for rejecting it. Public opinion began to tilt, and Meghan felt it. She wasn't just battling a memory anymore. She was battling the world's newfound admiration for the woman Harry lost. And let's not forget the palace. They watched from afar, silent but satisfied. Chelsea had always been their preference. She represented stability, tradition, a life Harry could have had without drama. Meghan was the opposite, disruptive, divisive, a force they could never control. For them, Harry's confession wasn't just personal, it was vindication. Proof that Meghan had never been the natural choice. But here's the cruel irony. The more Meghan fought to reclaim the narrative, the more the confession echoed. She could give more interviews. She could release more statements. She could even double down on her brand of victimhood. But no matter what she did, people remembered the words. Chelsea was the love of my life. And those words, once spoken, hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. Ask yourself, What happens to a marriage when the world learns that one partner was never the first choice? How do you rebuild trust, intimacy, and security when the truth has escaped into the public square? For Meghan, the fallout wasn't just external, it was internal. Every smile became harder to maintain. Every public appearance became another performance. And every night, in the quiet of their home, the ghost of Chelsea Davy lingered, louder than ever. The world had learned what Meghan always feared. And the question that followed was devastating. If Chelsea was the love of his life, then what was Meghan? And the question became, what happens to Harry and Meghan now? Two women, two paths, two choices that defined Prince Harry's destiny. On one side, Chelsea Davy, the free spirit who loved him deeply but walked away to protect her freedom. On the other, Meghan Markle, the ambitious actress who clung to him tightly, determined to turn their union into a brand, a movement, a weapon. The contrast is staggering, isn't it? Chelsea and Meghan represent two versions of Harry's life story. With Chelsea, he might have found peace. With Meghan, he found conflict. With Chelsea, love meant privacy, simplicity, authenticity. With Meghan, love meant exposure, ambition, reinvention. And the tragedy of it all? Harry chose the woman who stayed, not the woman who fit. Let's start with Chelsea. She never wanted the spotlight. She recoiled from the cameras, loathed the tabloids, rejected the notion of becoming a princess. She loved Harry, yes, but she loved her independence too much to sacrifice it. She wanted to build her own life, study law, pursue her career, travel the world without paparazzi breathing down her neck. Her refusal wasn't about a lack of love. It was about self-preservation. And in the end, she walked away with dignity. Now look at Meghan. She didn't run from the spotlight. She chased it. She didn't see the monarchy as a prison. She saw it as a platform. Every camera was an opportunity, every headline a chance to advance the Sussex story. Where Chelsea said, "I can't live like this," Meghan said, "I can make this work for me." To Harry, still aching from loss, Meghan's determination looked like devotion. But was it? Or was it simply ambition wearing the mask of love? And here's where the two women's stories collide in irony. Chelsea's refusal to play the game made her unforgettable. Meghan's willingness to play it made her controversial. The public has always sensed the difference. When Chelsea sat quietly at Harry's wedding, she won respect for her grace. When Meghan sat with Oprah, spilling royal secrets, she won headlines but lost credibility. For Harry, the comparison is haunting. Chelsea gave him unconditional love but refused his world. Meghan accepted his world but demanded conditions on her love. Chelsea loved the man. Meghan shaped the prince into a narrative. Which would you choose? The woman who walks away to save you both? Or the woman who stays, but at the cost of your freedom? And here's the cruel twist. Harry never really chose. Circumstance chose for him. Chelsea left. Meghan stayed. And sometimes in life, the person who doesn't leave feels like destiny. But in reality, they may simply be the last one standing. Do you feel the weight of that? Harry married the woman who didn't walk away, not necessarily the one who truly matched his soul. And that difference has echoed through every decision he's made since. From leaving the monarchy to waging wars against his family, every move carries the fingerprints of Meghan's ambition, not Chelsea's quiet love. But let's not romanticize Chelsea entirely. She wasn't perfect. She argued with Harry, clashed with his lifestyle, struggled with his temper. She wasn't built for royal life, and she knew it. Staying with Harry might have destroyed her. Walking away saved her. In many ways, she was wiser than Harry himself. She understood the price of the crown and refused to pay it. That choice gave her peace, but it left Harry adrift. And Meghan? She was ready to pay any price, but not for love. For power. For recognition. For a seat at the table Diana once occupied. Meghan wasn't content with being a duchess. She wanted to be a global icon. And Harry, still desperate for validation after losing Chelsea, gave her the fuel to build her empire. So here we are. Two women. Two choices. One prince caught in the middle of what could have been and what is. Chelsea remains the ghost of what Harry lost. Meghan remains the reality of what he has. And the tragedy? Harry seems to know, deep down, which life would have brought him peace. Because in the end, Chelsea left to protect herself. Meghan stayed to protect her future. And Harry, trapped between the woman he loved and the woman he married, may have doomed his own happiness. And Harry, caught between past and present, may have doomed his future.